improve your renders. So we're going to make a nice render that's a little bit out of the scope of this course, because we are focusing on making a model for Sketchfab or a game engine. But I can imagine you want to put this in a portfolio and make a nice presentation of this model. So that's why we are going to learn how to make a nice render in either Cycles or Eevee. So the first thing we'll do is make a render in Eevee. Eevee is the default render engine in Blender 2.8 and up. Eevee is a physics-based renderer, and that's different than Cycles, which is a ray trace-based renderer. Cycles is the second renderer we have in Blender. The big difference is that Eevee is a physics-based renderer, as said before, and physics-based, and with the emphasis on based, is following the rules of physics, so it's simulating that. And Cycle uses ray tracing. Ray tracing is more accurate. Ray tracing, as the word says itself, it's tracing the rays of light, and it's tracing the rays of light from one object to the other, and that way changing the color of the light. And that's how ambient light is calculated. When objects stand close to each other, the color of one object reflects on the other one. Ray tracing does not follow the direction of the light, it goes exactly the other way around. So let's take the sunlight as an example. A ray of light bounces from the sun on the well. The well then absorbs parts of the white light that the sun emits. What's left is this brown color, and the ray then reflects from the well and shines in your eye. And your brain then receives that as a brown color. Now ray tracing goes exactly the other way around. So we have a pixel on the screen, and from there we trace a ray back to the well and then up to the sun again. And then the renderer knows what color the pixel should be. Now Eevee works a lot simpler and a lot faster because of that. So we'll use Eevee first, but we'll also use Cycles because it uses the same shaders as Eevee does, and it's very easy to switch from Eevee to Cycles. And then you can compare both render engines and see that Cycles is much nicer, but also much slower. So first let's go to the, let's do that here. Let's go to the shading layout. And let's set the viewport shading on rendered. This one, the last one. Have a good look. We see all sorts of problems, but we can solve that. That's what we're here for. First thing I want to do is turn emission off on all the shaders. That's nice for in a game engine or here in Blender, but when you are rendering for portfolio use, it's better to turn it off. We'll also set the roughness to 1 and turn the specular down to 0 so that there's no shiny bits on our meshes. Setting the roughness on 1 should be enough, but I noticed some artifacts, so we'll turn the specular down. So let's have a look at all these shaders, all these materials. So let's start with the floor plane. And let's look. Roughness is on 1, specular, let's put it on 0. It's on the principled BSDF and no emission is used, correct. Let's select the grass. The roughness here is on 0.5, let's put it on 1. Specular to 0 and drag away the emission from the shader, like so. That makes it a lot darker, but we'll fix that later on. Now let's go to the well itself. It's on emission. We even use the emission shader. So let's delete that. Then make sure that the BSDF, principled BSDF output is set to the input of the material output. Now before we continue, as you can see it's pretty dark here. And that is because we turned down the strength from the HDRI in the background. So let's fix that first. Let's go to the World tab with the globe here. And here the strength is on 0.1. So let's put that on 1. And that makes everything a lot lighter. But every color is washed out now. So let's first go to the World shader here, Object, and then there choose World. So we'll work on the World shader, and it's pretty much the same as a material shader. We have the background here, that's this texture, and then we have a shader and we have a world output. Now our texture's color is connected to the background input color, but we can use this texture for a lot more. Make room here, and we need to do something with the strength. So let's add a node, Shift A, then go to Converter and choose Math. Okay, and then put it down here. Now set it on multiply. The value is 0.5, that's correct. Color out to value in. The second one on 0.5. Value out to strength. This already makes the light a lot better and gives less washed out colors, but we can do better than this, so let's put this aside. We'll need another math node, so let's duplicate the first one, select it and press Shift D. Make sure it's connected again by dragging it over the node. So the value goes to the value and the value goes to the strength. Now we need to put it on add instead of multiply and add 1. That's still a little bit too light. And I also see that I didn't put the roughness of the well on 1. So let's do that first. Let's have a look. Let's go back to object. And with the well selected, we see that indeed specular should be on 0 and roughness on 1. Now that looks pretty good, but I think the strength of the world background could be tuned a little bit down. So let's go back to world again and put the add on 0.5. Or we could put the multiply on 0.3. That looks better. Let's do it like this. So let's put the multiply on 0.3 and the add node on 1. Now let's compare. Let's put this on 0.5 again and back to 0.3. That's a little bit better. Let's go back to the object shaders because we need to do another trick, and let's select the grass first. And we want to have the grass a little bit darker, or at least I want to have an option to control the value of the grass with a node. Now when you look at the texture here, you see that it's a little bit darker than there, but that's because the background is shining light in the grass. Now we can adjust the texture by painting on it, but there's another option because that's a lot of work. So we will not paint on the texture, but we'll make a node that will control the color. So Shift A, then go to color and go to mix RGB. Let's connect it here by dragging it over this node. Then the color of the texture goes to color 1 and the color output of this mix node goes to the base color, and this results in an even more washed out color. And remember, left is color 1, right is color 2. So color 2 needs to have a different color because now we're making it more white and we want to make it darker. So let's just choose black. And now when we're dialing this a little bit down, you see we can now control the darkness of the grass. So let's put it somewhere here. Maybe a little bit lighter. This is what it was. Let's go darker, darker. Like this. That looks good to me. Now there's another thing wrong with the grass, and that's the shadow. When you look at the shadow, it does not have the shape of the grass, but it has the shape of the original mesh we made. So without the transparency. So let's go to Materials tab and scroll down, and here under Settings we have Shadow Mode. It's on Opaque, and we need to set it on Alpha Clip. Now we have a nicely shaped shadow. We can even make it better because when you zoom in, you'll see that the resolution is pretty low. The edges are a little bit jagged, pixelated. So let's go to the render options here and under shadow, open it, and here the cascade size, make that bigger. It's on 1024, let's put it on 2048. That's better, but let's compare. You see the difference, 1024. And then if you turn on soft shadows, it's even more gooder, or in good English better. Of course, it's not as cheap as the lower resolution shadow, and depending on your PC, it might work or might not work. If it's too much, then put it down and turn soft shadows off. Now, while we are in this tab, we can do something else as well. We can add some ambient occlusion to the floor, or everywhere, but you'll see it most on the floor. So let's turn on ambient occlusion here. And let's dial it up a little bit until we have something like this. You might ask, what is ambient occlusion? Remember the ball we painted before? That was a occlusion shadow in between the ball and the floor. Well, that's similar to what we have here. So I set it on 0.82 now. Next up, I think the grass is a little bit too light. I'd like to have it a little bit darker, so similar to the grass itself. And then we can do that with a Mix RGB node. So let's drag this aside and do Shift A, color, mix RGB and drag it in between here. We know by now how it works. Let's check how I set the mix RGB node in the grass. Mix, okay, mix here as well. And again put the color on black, like so. And this makes everything dark. That's not what we want. So we can dial it to the left or the right, make the grass darker, but then the sandy parts will also turn darker. Do we have a solution for that? Of course, we made a mask for that before. So we can use the same mask we used for the grass influence and that we use for the color of the floor. So let's take this color out and let me zoom in a bit so you can see what I'm doing. Make it bigger. So this grass influence texture, color out, let's bring that to the vector of this mix RGB node and voila, look at that, only the green parts are darker. Let's play with this a bit as well. When I dial it up, it's lighter and now it's darker. And then when I set it on multiply, up, let's zoom in a bit. You see I set it on multiply now, and now when I make it lighter, it'll be the same as it was. And when I make it darker, it'll be, well, darker. Okay, hope that's clear. We could even add another ramp so to play with the fall off here, but let's not do that for now. Okay, so we did the floor. Let's do a final check. Check the roughness and the specular. 1, 0, okay, grass. Yes, well, yes, okay. Let's have a look where the camera is. So now we can select the camera and move it like that with the normal grab key and the Z and the X and Y constraints. But we can also use Shift and then tilde or bracket on the top left of your keyboard, and then we can move around as if we are in a first person shooter. So with A, W, S and D we can move, and with Q and E we can go either up or down. Then with the mouse we can look around, and that's a very easy way of moving through our scene and finding a nice spot for our camera. So I'll just play around. You can do the same and find a nice spot for your camera so you can render out a nice image. Something like this, although I don't like the angle here, so there. So let's go a little bit closer. See, now this angle looks nicer. We miss our nicely erased bottom, but that's okay for now. Let's wiggle around just a tad more. The next thing I want to add is depth of field. And that way we can focus on parts of a picture, and that part will be sharp and the rest will be blurred. Depth of field is set in the camera settings. Make sure that the camera is selected, so then you can click on this tab here, and here you find depth of field. So turn it on, and as you see, nothing happens. And that's because we have nothing set yet, so let's do this first. In Eevee I don't like the settings here because the f-stop is at 2.8 here, and you'll see later on that that's not correct, at least not to a real camera's f-stop. It works better in cycles, but let's work with what we have. So let's first focus on an object. We want to focus on the well, so with the picker here we can pick the well. We can reset it by clicking on the cross here, and then we can also open this up and select the well or the object you want to focus on here. So with the picker, select the well. Let's do it like that. So now we have the focus on the well, but we can also do it in another way. I'll show you that a little bit later. Now you can also choose a focus distance instead of an object, and that way the camera will focus on the distance selected. If you put it back on the well, it'll jump back to the distance from the camera to the well. Now we have a parture here. Let's first set the ratio to a lower number. Let's choose 0.5. And still nothing happens. And normally with an f-stop of 2.8 we should get some defocusing now. Even if I put it lower on 0.1 or 0.01, so 100th, still nothing happens. So let's put it on a half, and here in the f-stop, put it on, for example, 0.4, which is extremely low for an f-stop. Maybe a little bit less. Oops. 0.6, 0.7. Let's play with the ratio again, 0.1. And I'm just guessing now, because normally an f-stop of 2.6 would already have a very defocused image. So I'm just playing with it, and that's the best thing you can do in this case. So now we have a very nice image where the well is sharp and the rest is defocused. The foreground is defocused, the background is defocused. Now say you want to have the front of this well in focus instead of the center of the well. Because you chose the well, it'll choose the origin. Where's the origin? Overlays, origins, there. You see the center here, so the origin of the well is the place where the camera focuses on now. So, say you want to focus on this crack here, so the front of the well. I could select the camera, then go to the focal distance here, and try to find the distance to the crack. But it's just guessing, and it's a little bit hard to do. It's working, but there's an easier way. So let's do that. The easy way is to add an object that's invisible and focus on that object. So hit Shift A, and what object is invisible? That's an empty. It doesn't matter what kind of empty you choose. Just choose the plane axis, for example. And drag it up. There it is. And yes, it's visible now, but not when rendering. Now let's go back to the camera, select the camera. And here, focus on object, choose the empty. Now select the empty, and let's go to top view, 7 on the numpad, and then let's make sure that the empty is on the appropriate corner of the well. And let's be accurate, let's place it exactly there, like so. And now look through the camera again, by hitting O on the numpad. You see, the corner is sharp, the back of the well is unsharp. When you grab the empty, and drag it around, you can play with the focal distance. Just like when you play with the focal distance of a camera. Cool, eh? So let's keep it there. And let's make our first render in Eevee now. Not the first one, but the first one in this lecture. And make sure you save, because rendering is intense for your graphic card. And it might crash, not saying it will, but hit F12 to render. And let's see, there it is. Super fast. Eevee is super fast. Let's save it. Save as. And where's my window? And there's my window. And let's go to the Blender Udemy folder, render folder, and call it Final Eevee. Or any name to your flavor. Eevee. Save as image. Let's put it away for now. Next up is our cycles render. So let's go to the render panel, and that one. And render engine is on Eevee, put it on cycles. And we see some minor problems here. The colors are very nice, but there's something happening with the grass. Earlier I explained that cycles traces light rays coming from the sun and bouncing from object to object. But we need to set a limit to the max amount of bounces. We've set it on 12 here. That is because else, if we wouldn't set a limit, it would just keep bouncing until we're out of memory and Blender would crash. But in this case, with so many grass objects and we set the max bounces too low, the light will bounce from grass object to grass object, and at a certain point, after 12 bounces in this case, it'll stop bouncing and create this black void. So we can set the max bounces higher. Make sure you save first, because you might crash, and then here in the light paths settings, here, choose full global illumination. And I repeat, be careful, save first, because when you have a smaller computer with little memory, you might crash. Let's do that. Full global illumination, away. Okay, so now we have a total of 128 bounces, and as you can see, nothing happened. I don't know why. But when I turn off reflective caustics and turn it on again, it works. Now you see Blender gives a lot of noise. That's a disadvantage of Blender. That's because we have the sample setting too low. We'll fix that later on, but let's first have a look at the sun lamp because the shadow is pointing in the wrong direction. And that's because Cycles doesn't use the sun lamp itself, but it uses the HDRI background. So let's see, where is my sun? Look, there it is. So the shadow created at this moment in Cycles is coming from that sun. You see, that's the direction from that sun. So the sun lamp is something we don't need anymore. So we can not delete it, but select it and turn the strength all the way down. We don't delete it because we might want to use it later in Eevee again, for example. And because the sun lamp has no influence anymore, the shadow is even darker, but it's not pointing in the direction that we want. And we can fix that. Remember, let's go up and look here at the shaders, look at the world shader. And here we have the background texture again. Now, remember we had a texture mapping node, and we can use that to rotate this background texture as well. So in the vector input, we add Shift A, vector, mapping. Put it in the vector. What we also need is the texture coordinates. So under input, choose, where are we? Texture coordinates. This time we need generated, because the background is generated and doesn't use a UV. Now the sun and the HDRI light are pointing in totally different directions, so let's go to the top view and see it's about 180 degrees the other way around. So let's first try that. Let's, in the rotation here, the Z rotation, put it on 180 degrees. That's probably a little bit too much. Let's have a look. You can see the shadow is not falling where I want it, so let's put it on 170. The grass might be a little bit too dark in Cycles, but maybe okay. So let's try a render first. Oh, let's have a look at the depth of field first. So let's look to the camera by hitting 0 on the numpad. That looks okay. Let's render it and make a comparison. Make sure you save first. Save your project. Oh, and I forgot, we have a lot of noise here, and we should fix that first. So the easiest way is go into the layer tab, this one, and turn on denoising, this one, close it again, and now go to the render panel, and then under sampling, in the render options, here sampling render, we can make this number higher, but I won't do that for now because denoising will work probably. It will be fine. So let's hit F12 to make a first render in Cycles. And because Cycles is a lot slower, I will speed up the video now. And it's finished, so let's save. Save as. There's my window again. And let's call it Final Cycles. Save as image. I think this looks pretty good. The grass is not too dark, but what I do see is this edge here popping up now. We can fix that. Let's first select the well, and we have a different kind of shading for a model, for a mesh. So let's go to solid view. We see the shading is flat. This gives these hard edges, but there's also a smooth shading. So let's hit the right mouse button. It is on shade flat now, and let's put it on shade smooth. This does not change the mesh, but it does change the way it's rendered. When you look at it in a rendered view, you hardly see any difference, except that the hard edges are eliminated. Hopefully. All depends a little bit on the model and on the lighting. And let's go to our next trick. Speaking about lighting, let's first select the empty. And then hit Shift S and choose cursor to selected. Now the cursor is on the empty, then hit Shift A, go to light and select a point lamp. Now scroll to the side view of the well. And if you have problems with it in this render preview, you can also go to solid mode and drag the lamp a little bit forward. It's almost gone now, you see. put it down a bit. It also lights up the sides a bit, but that's not really a problem. We can make the size of the lamp a little bit bigger. That blends the light a little bit better on the sides. Let's give it some more distance from the well as well. Let's go to side view and drag the lamp away from the well. This edge here is the influence circle of the light. You see we have a fall off there. Let's go back to front view again and let's wait for the samples to build up. I think it's as good as gone. Let's turn it off again. You see there's a hard edge there. And when you turn it on again, the edge is pretty much eliminated. We might add a second lamp. You can do so if you want. Now to speed things up, we can also have a look at the performance here in the render panel. So make these tiles a lot bigger. It's on 64 by default, but when you have more memory you can crank that up. I'll put it on 1024 now. I don't know if that's good or not good, because I have a pretty new computer and I don't think I ever used cycles in this one before this course, so let's try that and we'll see. Hit F12 to render. Let's drag in this window. You see these tiles are now much bigger, so it renders one big part at a time. Let's see if this works and if it's faster. I'll speed up the video again and see you back afterwards. So in the end the tile size I chose was much too big. It really took a long time now. But we're just rendering once for a portfolio, we're not making an animation or something, so it's not really a big problem I think. It's again a little bit beyond the scope of this course, so I won't go into much depth here. In the meanwhile I am saving my project. So I have a little bit of an edge here, but it's much better. I don't think it's that annoying anymore. Maybe I'll fix it later on for another render, but not for now. Okay, I'll put the Eevee and the Cycles version on the screen together, then you can compare them. Have a good look at the beams for example, because you can see the depth of field. The transition there is much better in Cycles. So I'll show them now. And that's it for this lecture. See you in the next. Bye bye.